to be back, and great to see the Democrats are alive and well in San Francisco tonight. Raphael, thank you very much for your gracious comments, and to you and the entire Board of Trustees. We are very fortunate. We have got a very talented, intelligent, committed, focused, and somewhat empowered Board of Trustees, and so I'm very confident that we're on the right track. We're going to do what we can in the budget this year because there is still need. We recognize that, and it's really maddening. We don't want to get too deep into our disappointments and frustrations tonight, but that this commission could have caused so much damage. That we were victimized, and we're not the only campus in the system to have been victimized. We're not the only district. And so there is strong bipartisan support not only to move on from this failed and toxic commission, but also to do what we can to sustain our system as we come into and out of our recovery period. So to the Board of Trustees and the community college. So Tom gave me a long list of things that I'd like to talk about, and I hope you don't mind. I just thought I'd talk about a few things that you may not hear about if it weren't from someone coming from Sacramento. So I want to talk about just a couple of bills, not just to focus on some of the issue areas we're working on, but also to use those issues and bills as an example of what's going on in the legislature right now. You know, things shift from time to time. The Assembly is a little more progressive. The Senate's a little more progressive. Now, of course, since we have this 12-year, 6-term in the Assembly, 3-term in the Senate term limit system, there's going to be more stability. In fact, after 2016, there won't be an open Assembly seat until 2022, which is pretty dramatic because up until now, there has been a 30% turnover every 2 years. It's just been a spinning assembly. Very little stability, very little opportunity for any of them to get any kind of expertise in how the system works. That's going to change now. In most cases, unless someone really screws up, they'll have an opportunity to serve 12 years in the Assembly or 12 years in the Senate. People won't be bouncing back and forth from house to house. There'll be more stability, less fundraising for more campaigns, and hopefully more focus on the public policy issues that were sent to Sacramento to address. Now, the downside of that is we're going to be stuck with the houses that we have, especially on the Assembly side, for some years to come. And the picture on the Assembly side right now is not a pretty one. And you may have seen what happened last year with our SB 350, which I jointly authored with President Pro Tem of the Senate, Kevin DeLeon, which doubled our renewable portfolio standard, so 50% of all the electricity produced in California by 2030 will be from renewable sources. We doubled our energy efficiency in all of our buildings in California by 2030. And then the third part of SB 350 was to reduce our use of petroleum by 50% by 2030. And the oil industry did a $25 million misinformation campaign. You didn't see the ads here in the Bay Area, specifically targeted at Central Valley districts to frighten mostly Democratic members of the Assembly from the Central Valley not to vote for it. And in the end, we had to take it out. Unfortunately, all the press said that the governor and legislative leaders suffer rare defeat. But in fact, we doubled our renewable portfolio standard. We doubled the efficiency of all our buildings, all in one bill. That was a major success. Unfortunately, the oil industry had its success in requiring us to take out that piece to get it to the governor's desk. And of course, it was misinformation because they were suggesting in these commercials that the legislature wanted to ration gasoline, wanted to limit the number of days you could drive your car, limit the number of miles you could drive in your car. It wasn't about reducing our fuel consumption by 50%. It was reducing our petroleum use by 50%. Of course, that's very different. We want non-polluting fuels. So we want better mileage in our automobiles, which we're getting now. even out of Washington, biofuels, varieties of new fuels, and of course, non-polluting electric cars. So that all happened, but why did that happen? We have a growing block of what's known as moderate. There's nothing really moderate about them. They're just a little too friendly with business interests, corporate interests, Democrats elected. So, of course, how has this happened? It's because of the top two runoff that we now have. And that goes back to Abel Maldonado realizing he could never win a Republican primary with his family's name on the Republican side, and he had statewide aspirations. That was the whole reason for the top two. And he literally extorted it out of us to give up a vote to pass a budget so many years ago when we required 2/3 majorities for the budget. And it was as bald as that. It was extortion. And if you ask, isn't that a felony? Yes, I think so. But unfortunately, he got away with it. In any case, what happens now is in more moderate parts of the state, and even though the state becomes bluer and bluer, all Democratic districts aren't like San Francisco or Bay Area districts, we know that. And it's Democrat on Democrat in many of the November elections. The Chamber of Commerce and deep-pocketed corporate interests invest in the more moderate of the two Democrats. And so oil interests, pharmaceutical interests, insurance interests, tobacco interests now have made deep relations and relationships with so many of these Democrats. So there were over 20 Democrats that signed a letter to the Speaker of the Assembly complaining about the reduction of oil, petroleum use by 2030. And that was the demise of that part of the bill. So how does this play out in other ways? As you know, I've been trying to raise the statewide minimum wage for the past 2 years now, 2 years in a row.
Yep.
Raising the minimum wage from a severely sub-poverty level to the federal poverty line has been killed twice in the Assembly, a democratically controlled Assembly. This is not a 2/3 majority vote. You need a simple majority. And the Assembly, that's 41 votes. They've got 54 Democrats in the Assembly. We just need 41. Couldn't even get it taken up for a vote. So I'll come back to that in a moment, but that's just one example. We've been trying to regulate e-cigarettes as the tobacco products that they are, because of course a whole new generation is getting addicted to the neurotoxin of nicotine through e-cigarettes, which are not legally sold to minors, but are marketed to minors in flavors like bubblegum and Mountain Dew and root beer, and it goes on and on. And the fastest growing market segment of this new industry, which is doubling in revenue every 2 years, from below $1 billion a few years ago to $10 billion in the next couple of years, the fastest growing market segment, middle and high school students who have never smoked a traditional cigarette before. And I couldn't get a vote in the Assembly for that, though we have bipartisan support for that. And we're confident we have more than 41 votes. The Speaker of the Assembly wouldn't even let it come up for a vote. And then a third issue that I can use as a demonstration is we've been trying for a while now to not ban or prohibit the use of solitary confinement in our juvenile justice system, but limit it, put some parameters around it. Can't use it as punishment. Can't use it for more than 4 hours at a time. Kids are being put into solitary confinement for months on end. 65% of all children who kill themselves in our system are in solitary confinement when they do it. And over 50% who kill themselves in our system have been in solitary confinement. The United Nations has deemed it to be torture and has urged all nations of the world to ban it for those under 18. We're just trying to limit it. I can't get it through the Assembly. So, don't mean to be overly dramatic about it, but this is what's happening. And as I say, the benefits to this new 12-year scheme of term limits, because of it, there won't be any turnover in the Assembly from 2016 to 2022. And that's what that Assembly is going to look like for the next 6 years. Yes?
I'm curious, in these cases where like Democrats and stuff have gone against what you wanted to do you think they're getting money from people to do that?
Well, there have been any number of investigative reports that do look, and I want to be respectful of colleagues. Clearly, everyone doesn't agree with me. I don't agree with everyone, and I don't want to presume motivation for anyone's making up their mind. I don't like to be accused of something. I've got my own way of making up my mind. But if you follow the money, if you make the connections, it is rather overwhelming, for example, how much money the committee chair of the committee that killed our e-cigarette bill has taken from tobacco interests. And so a lot of the visual representation of the opposition to our e-cigarette bill was small mom-and-pop vape shops who claim that they're going to have to fire their 5 employees and they're going to be unable to run their small businesses. In fact, Wells Fargo has estimated that by the end of the decade, 75% of the e-cigarette industry will be owned by the 3 big tobacco companies. And they think they found their holy grail, a so-called safe delivery system for toxic nicotine, which of course, we've been through this before. We remember filtered cigarettes, right? Safe. Right? So it's frustrating, and yes, it's a lot about money. It's a lot about money, and we know that. It is. For many years, Democrats would not take tobacco money. It was considered so dirty and so much of a liability to go back to your district and have it be revealed that you're taking tobacco. Suddenly that's disappeared.
Mark, they say sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Some of this in
well,
some ways.
Yes, and so that's what Joni's working on. Everyone really, I would suggest everyone sign up before you leave tonight. This is very important. I worked with Joni and many on this issue, tried to get it through the legislature. We couldn't, so now we've got to go to the ballot.
Investigative reporters that can bring
Yes,
this
there
to
are.
light?
There are. In fact, Laurel Rosenhall. There's a great new online news outlet called Cal Matters, C-A-L Matters. And it is investigative reporting, so that it's not a daily publication. They dig deeper into issues, and she does a lot of exposing of who's taking what and how they're voting. Yes. So it's a challenging time up there. It's maddening, it's frustrating, but of course we do what we do and what we can do. Happy to take some questions if you like.
Thank you for what you have done and what you've been doing there, because we know your time is soon to be up.
You know, I've never been booted out of anywhere before in my life.
No. I want to say thank you.
I know, I appreciate that, Susan. I appreciate that.
And what has been the most fulfilling piece of legislation that you've done?
Well, thank you. I don't like superlative questions, but let me just finish up on the dynamic of our minimum wage bill. So, you may remember California raised its minimum wage from $8 an hour to $9 an hour, July 1st of 2014, with another dollar raise to occur January 1st, 2016. So that's all happened. We've gone from $8 an hour to $10 an hour. Of course, business interests, Chamber of Commerce always say this is a job-killing bill. This is going to kill businesses. People will lose their jobs. And we've got studies that show that we're right. They've got studies that show that they're right. And folks, let's just focus here. July 1st, 2014, California raised its minimum wage from 8 to 10 in 2 steps to happen by January 1st, 2016. At the time, our unemployment rate was 7.5%. Our minimum wage is now $10 an hour. 18 months later, our unemployment rate is 5.9%. You don't have to look much further. So then they say, well, if you go much higher than $10 an hour, it's going to. So, but it's just the same drumbeat, I think they have no credibility whatsoever. We have facts on our side. And beyond that, can't we all agree that in the richest state, in the richest nation, that we have the highest rates of poverty, and that almost 1 million working people, working full-time, are living below the federal poverty line because it's legal to pay sub-poverty wages in California. And because it's legal for employers to pay sub-poverty wages, you and I subsidize those employers because by definition they all qualify for public assistance, for housing, for food, for medical care. We're subsidizing the workers of Walmart we're subsidizing the wealthiest family on earth, the Walton family, because they pay their workers so little, they qualify for public assistance. And this is where left meets right. Bill O'Reilly's response to Barack Obama's suggestion that we should raise the federal minimum wage from $7.25 an hour, that's barely $14,000 a year, to $10.10. Bill O'Reilly's response was, no big deal. The right doesn't like that tax dollars should subsidize private employers.
Oh my God.
So we've got an interesting dynamic here. And so I'll just conclude by saying that you probably know there are 2 pending statewide ballot measures from November 2016, which would raise California's minimum wage from $10 to $15 by 2020 in one case and 2021 in another case. And the governor understands that raising the minimum wage does not kill jobs. He signed this last one, of course, into law. He understands that low-wage earners have to spend everything they earn to pay the rent and put food on the table. That's billions of more dollars circulating in our local communities. That means more people are consuming. 70% of our economy is based on consumer spending. And that drives up the demand for goods and services, which is when employers hire more people to meet the greater demand, and then more people have more money in their pockets to consume, and it's a virtuous cycle upwards. The governor gets that. He also doesn't want to see a $15 measure on the November ballot. So we have a leverage point here in negotiations with him. He'd like to see the legislature get this done. So that's my hope within the next couple of months. We'll reach some agreement with the governor, hopefully be able to twist some arms in the assembly with the governor's express support for an increased minimum wage. And I have to credit everyone and anyone who's been involved in this fight for 15. It was almost dreamlike in its aspirations just 3-4 years ago. Now the governor of the state of New York, with the support of Vice President Biden, supports a $15 an hour minimum wage in the state of New York, and of course Bernie Sanders and no, not Hillary.
She's supporting 13 in Nevada.
Yes, others are supporting $15 for the entire nation. So it's really gone from just a wild, crazy idea to really mainstream.
Martin O'Malley.
Martin O'Malley, thank you.
That other guy.
Not an afterthought.
I always forget his name too.
I have great respect for Martin O'Malley. Just he has no place to work in this particular dynamic. So again, thank you very much for letting me come talk to you.
Thank you.
Sure.
2 questions. I know you had your hand up.
Yeah, I had a Prop 30 question.
Yes.
We think about money all the time here, but
I do too.
yeah, well, we're glad you do.
Yeah.
But so, what is happening with Prop 30 extension? We had an all-day Board of Trustees meeting today, and we heard a little bit about a Prop 30 extension proposal being introduced that doesn't extend the sales tax and only extends the income tax.
You've got it.
And
Got it.
is
So
that
this is
what it's going to be?
SEIU State Council, which is one of the 2 sponsors of the $15 an hour minimum wage bill. They also have the extension of Prop 30, and it would not extend the regressive sales tax, but just extend the surcharge on the top 1%, which is individuals over $250,000 a year and couples over $500,000 a year. I think for another 12 years it extends it. And the governor, in his presentation of the budget this year, said that it had a fatal flaw, that it exempted these new revenues from the Prop 2 requirement, our new rainy day fund, so that a percentage would have to go into the lockbox of the rainy day fund. Clearly that would provide more money for education and for healthcare and for social services, but the governor was very clear, fatal flaw, that the voters were clear, they want Prop 2 and its security for any approaching downturn. And they had 2 more days before they had to finalize their language to begin collecting their signatures. They took that out. So now the hope is, and expectation, reasonable expectation, the governor won't oppose it. He may not support it, but he won't oppose it.
You have a final question?
Yeah. Wonder about your thoughts on the possibility of going back to the California Master Plan for Higher Education, which I believe is still in effect.
A novel idea. A novel idea.
He is acting as if it doesn't is not in effect.
You are correct.
Many of the problems that city launch, I think, society accreditation will be solved by having free junior colleges. That's already been proposed to some extent at the federal level. I know tuition went up years just after I was finishing school, 10% a year, imposition of tuition, all kinds of problems. Just because California is underfunding education, especially compared to all the other states, not the prisons and all kinds of things. What is the hope for something like that? Is there anyone chatting?
Well, it all comes back to funding, not surprisingly. Of course, community colleges have a minimum guarantee along with K through 12 through Prop 98. And the good news is, with regard to Prop 98 funding, because of all of our growing revenues and the recovery that some, if not all, are experiencing right now, but we certainly are because so much of our revenue pie now comes from capital gains of the top 1 or 2%. And so that increases minimum funding levels for K through 14. For the first time in the history of California, we will now be spending more than $10,000 per pupil this year. And we were as low as 7,000 just a couple years ago. So in raw numbers, we've gone from 47, we were down to as low as 47 billion in 2012. We're now going to be at 71 billion for K through 14 in 16, 17. So that's all good. But with regard to CSU and UC, it was just a couple decades ago that we used to spend over 10% of our general fund for our higher education systems, and now we're down below 5%. The state has not kept its promise to fund higher education, and that's why we've seen tuition increase so much. Yes, there's debate as to whether management is overstaffed and overfunded. That is a worthy debate, but overall, we are not funding our colleges and universities, and they have few other options to find revenue. And that's the problem right now. That's why it's such a struggle for a performing California high school student to get the promise of the master plan and be able to get into CSU or UC. So it's all about funding.
So with that, let's thank the Senator for coming.
I just renewed my membership to San Francisco. I want to thank you for your engagement and for your passion and for your interest in all the things that are so important to all of us. You're a great and important voice. And of course, I can't forget you were always with me, so I'm always with you.
The Police Officers Association endorsed Vicki Hennessy for sheriff, and of course she's not going to tolerate dissent, which is protesters at City Hall who protest are not, well, I'll get to that later, but not enough progressives voting for Ross Mercarini. Ross tolerated political dissent. I loved how during his last hour as sheriff, he allowed protesters to loudly heckle Ed Lee being sworn in by the Governor Brown, as mayor. And they had to shout at each other to hear each other being sworn in. And after Willie Brown blamed Ross, blasted Ross. Of course, he's one of the media's favorite whipping boys. And but Ross did allow peaceful protests and loud ones at that. That's okay. There was no violence, but there were a few arrests there. I didn't go. I meant to. But so our new sheriff will communicate with ICE, which is the Immigration Customs Enforcement. So immigrants, all bets are off. They're going to start breaking up families. And also, the Police Officers Association is now joined with the new Sheriff Hennessy, of course. They endorsed her, so why wouldn't they be? And she was also endorsed by the private prison industry. Ross wasn't. So that tells you something. So in December, the Police Officers Association, who opposed they opposed shields. Those were proposed as defense against knife-wielding suspects. So Also in December, the San Francisco Police Department tightened its rules around pointing a gun at a suspect, also opposed by, you guessed it, the Police Officers Association. So, should the cops shoot a fleeing suspect? Well, kind of like my dad was shot by the police because they didn't chase him down, they just shot him. He was unarmed, running away, and they shot him in the back. So they, every time an officer pulls their gun, they have to report it. Those are according to the new SFPD rules about pulling your weapon. And they have to articulate the reason for pointing the firearm. Marty Halloran, the president, who used to be the treasurer way back when, of the Police Officers Association, opposes it. He opposes having to report officers pointing their guns, saying tasers save, and he also says the tasers save lives. So, and bless Supervisor David Campos, he's the greatest. He says that de-escalation needs a fundamental change. Now, de-escalation is sort of like maybe, for example, those Swedish cops that were on vacation in New York, instead of pulling weapons, they were tourists, they just grabbed somebody who was having a mental health episode somewhere in New York and just grabbed him and held him so he couldn't move and talked him down and then let him go, They even stroked his head like a kitty cat. I think that might help. They had a technique and it worked that time. So, and our officers could learn from that. De-escalation.